Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Illumi-Nation. Thank you all so much for being here. You might recognize our guest this week. We had Corrine on a few weeks ago. And just as a reminder, Corrine is a very gifted empath and psychic intuit. And she has been doing this work for many, many years. We will have her full bio in the show notes, but we're going to jump right in because today is, I think, is a topic that touches all of our lives, either personally or through people that we know and love. And it is about addiction and how addiction and spirituality, what is the connection? So I want to welcome our guest, Corrine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
for
much for
coming.
having me.
I feel like this topic is like a topic that isn't often discussed openly and candidly. And I am so excited to put this on the table for people because I think that within spirituality, there's a lot of emotions that and possible judgment that could come along with this. And even when people are going through their own personal journey, it can be very difficult for people to be vulnerable when they have this connection. And really us stepping into a place of compassion and openness so we can create a platform for people to talk about this or even connect to people that are going through this so they have a deeper understanding of how addiction can connect spiritually. But I'd really love to start, Corrine, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
So I've always had intuitive gifts and always been a medium and always had addictive tendencies because there were times, many times in my growing up and in my teen and early 20s where my spiritual gifts felt unsafe to me, and they felt overwhelming. And really, I thought I was crazy. I mean, maybe the jury's still out on that one, but I thought that I really thought that I was insane. I knew in my heart of hearts that I could feel other people's feelings, but I also knew that wasn't possible, right? And I had
really quickly, I felt very deeply also, but I didn't understand it. For those of you that are out there, sometimes you don't always know what it is that's going on. And I know we'll get into that more later, but yeah, I had no clue what was happening. And I also can relate to feeling crazy in my younger years, like not understanding what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, it really did overtake my life. And then I was in a car accident when I was 16 or 17, like late 16, early 17. And a guy rear-ended me and I got really badly injured. And of course, they gave me pain medication. And for the first time in my whole life, it was quiet. It was the first experience I had when I could walk into a bank without feeling everything and the vibrations and the sadness and the anger and all the things. I felt a little on the numb side. And then it really continued. I sought that break for years after that. What I ended up discovering is that the only way to quiet down my gifts was, which I didn't consider them gifts at all. I just thought I was crazy. I just thought I was crazy, and was drugs and alcohol was how I quieted it down. I didn't mean for it to be an addiction. At no point was it a party for me. I wasn't like hooping it up, and I was alone by myself, using drugs and alcohol to quiet it down a little bit.
I don't think that really. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wanted to say that, and in my work, because also I think this is true for a lot of empaths when you don't understand all the feelings that you feel. I remember when I would walk into a room, I would be so confused as to what was mine, what belonged to me and what didn't. And, a dear friend of mine who's also a therapist, we used to talk about how the how we would meet some of the most deeply spiritual people who had these major, massive addictions because of exactly what you're talking about, and not knowing what to do, not even understanding, like you said, some people feeling crazy, but not even understanding, just feeling like the whole world felt this way, right? Like you don't even understand that that you're different. What were you going to say, Val?
I was just going to say, I don't think anyone wakes up saying, hey, I'm
Yeah.
going to be an addict. It's not, no matter how you end up there, no one really sees it coming and chooses that. And so it can be scary once you build the codependency around it. But I think, yeah, even for me, well, I had a lot of aversions to mind altering substances. And so, going into this, my journey was very scary too, just in a different way. But I can totally relate to that feeling of like walking into a building and like, why am I feeling heavy? Why am I feeling emotional? What am I feeling? And you thinking it's actually you. So I think it's so important for people to understand that when you're trying to experience energy and separate it all, when it's part of it's coming into your auric field, it very much feels like your reality. Your perception is that it's you. And so it takes a lot of training and understanding of the energetic body and spirituality to navigate knowing, oh, this is someone else's, or this is how I'm feeling, and being able to separate that all. And so I guess that kind of leads into like, how does feeling energy really play into addiction? Like, what did you find for yourself?
So, my experience was that I got sober, and I want to be clear that I'm not, this is my experience, and it's not by any means a complete picture. But they put me on a lot of psychiatric medications to come off the drugs and alcohol, which also did the same thing for me. It kept those intuitive feelings, that empathy, the spirit connection. It kept it quieter. Not completely. It never completely goes away.
Right. Can we slow the story down though? Can you tell us, so you at 16 years old, which is actually a
Oh,
very
yeah.
common story with of how young people get addicted is through an injury, right? Because we do not have a good alternative to opioids for pain. So can you tell us, how did you just tell us when you
How did
reached
it
that,
progress?
and when you decided to get some help? And
Yeah, so it was a divine decision. It was not my own, but so certainly I chased after. I had repeated injuries that required medication, and ultimately I was very anti mood altering substances too, Valerie. Like, I kind of came from a family of alcoholism, so my mother was very firm about that. So I thought, if you smoked weed, if you did drugs, you were a bad person. If you got drunk, you were a bad person. So I avoided those things, and I took the medication, the pain medication, because I needed it. Right, that was my justification. So in my early 20s, or in my late teens, I moved out on my own in my early 20s and had my own apartment. And there was no one, I was living alone. There was no one to regulate. Right. And slowly but surely I found, or actually a crowd found me right in my own apartment. Somebody, a friend of mine, introduced someone to me in my apartment, brought him to my apartment in the middle of the night, like, hey, I'm in town, let me come by. And I started experimenting with other mind altering substances. In an extremely short period of time, it escalated. So, I started with a prescription pill, Oxycontin, one Oxycontin, and I felt like I had arrived. I felt free. I could breathe. I wasn't feeling so overwhelmed and so heavy for the first time. But of course, like with opiates, it builds in your system. And I needed more, and I needed more, and I needed more. And before I knew it, I was using intravenous heroin and smoking cocaine, smoking crack. So, but it took me down really fast because I just couldn't get enough relief. It stopped working. It betrayed me, right? Because the problem was me. I was the problem. I was not in a healed, safe space, and I was looking for some of that. So the drugs were my solution. The alcohol was my solution to me, the problem of me. I didn't know that there was other options. Nobody had ever talked to me about this or presented the ideas, and I still was sold that I was crazy.
And Corinne, though, may I ask, because I know that I've done a lot of work with around addiction with people in my work, and the shame that follows addiction is the debilitating piece, right? Because you use, you feel good, you come down, you feel ashamed, and then you want to quiet the shame. So now you're dealing as an empath, as an intuit. You've got this solution to wanting to keep the quiet, but then you also have the shame. I can feel it even as you're telling me the story. Can you because I do feel like the shame can actually perpetuate the addiction. Forget about the withdrawals,
100%.
right? There's the physical aspect, right? The actual addictive, the psychological addiction, the biological addiction, and then the deep shame, the pain that just mounts on top, So can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'll be honest, my story is a slight bit different than I think some that you have heard on this in this particular piece, because I didn't feel a lot of shame during my active addiction. I didn't feel a lot of anything. Right. It was when I finally made my first strike at trying to be sober, which was not my decision. My life was in danger, and I was forced into a situation via police, ambulance, and someone trying to murder me, where I had to reach out for help. It was not my choice. If it was up to me, I would have stayed. I ran out of opportunities to stay in that scenario. And even though I didn't want to live anymore, I didn't want to die either. So like, it was just, living was painful, right? And that's why I use drugs and alcohol, because being alive hurt. But I didn't want to kill myself. Do you understand? Like, people get confused about this particular piece. But when I got sober, that's when the shame, because I became present in my life for the first time in several years, like 4 years. All of a sudden, I'm present in my life, and I'm ashamed of. I can't believe I let this happen. I was a good kid. Like, I didn't get into trouble. I didn't get arrested. And now all of a sudden I've lost my car, my job, my license. I've been arrested, 2 car accidents in the same day. Like,
Where's your family? What's going on with your family, your parents? Like, what's happening in that?
God bless my mother. She is one of the most amazing humans, truly. My mother's also a psychic. She may not call herself that openly, but she sure as shit is. She works as a psychic. She's like, oh, I'm intuitive. I'm like, Ma. She went to a group of intuitive women. They met regularly to pray for their addicted children. And it was Thanksgiving. And she said to them, will you please pray? I haven't seen my daughter or heard from her in months. I don't 100% know where she is. Will you please pray that she comes home? And 2 nights later, was when the guy that I was with came after me with a knife and tried to murder me. And I was bullied. The universe bullied me into calling my parents. Yeah. So my mother was in Al-Anon and all these other support groups, learning how to lay some boundaries for when and holding the faith that I would eventually come home.
It's very challenging. I think that, right, everybody's story around how they land in this is very different. Mm-hmm. I know for me, my only aversion is that I physically can't tolerate most of the stuff that people take. But I imagine if I could very easily see myself diving into a similar path, because it's so overwhelming and overstimulating. And so, really just reaching out to the people that have all the different stories so they understand. It doesn't matter how, why, when, what led to it. It doesn't matter. I guess the point in all of this is, why people are doing it. And I think that's the most important thing for us to bring to the table. So many people that I know in my lifetime were very gifted and like couldn't differentiate any of it, and just they didn't have the support system. And even people that aren't in a place of addiction typically don't have an emotional support system when you're feeling things deeply, never mind when you're feeling your own stuff and everybody around you. And so it's actually, it's so heartbreaking to me. And I wish that this was something that was talked about so much more, so those people can say, hey, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I want to understand this, because it's the seeds that we plant for people in general. For people, when you consciously understand something, it can open a door where it's like, it's not you. You're not doing life wrong. You're not failing. You shouldn't be ashamed. You're just somebody that didn't have information and was trying to find answers in the way that you could with what you had in that moment. And I really want to reach the masses with that. If you are somebody that is struggling in that experience, to certainly try to tap into some of the reasons why. And so really knowing it's a solution to pain, like we were talking about. And, oftentimes I see it being like a void in somebody, and a void could be, something's missing within your emotional needs. Or on the flip side of that, you might have had a lot of pain and you're storing that energy in you too. So I feel like there's two sides to it too. There's the feeling of everything around you, and then the feeling of what's within you. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to fill that hole in your soul with something, right? So in being in a constant place of lack, I mean, it definitely allowed me to not be able to focus on those things. Active addiction made it so I didn't have to feel those things.
Yeah.
So what happened when you started to get sober and you had to reawaken to the gifts that you hold? Like I can imagine that was not an easy road back. Can you talk to us about your path to recovery, and also because we call it alignment, right? Being in alignment or being out of alignment with love. And so talk to us about what that looked like for you.
I will say that I participate, and I'm a member of a 12-step program, and that was a godsend for me, right? And for the first 4 or 5 years of my sobriety, I really still didn't feel like I fully belonged. I still didn't know what was missing. I was still psychiatrically medicated, but I just felt the lack. I still felt, I don't know, that hole in my soul feeling, right? And I decided that I wanted to get married to my partner. He asked me to marry him. We were going to get married, and I decided to come off all psychiatric medications because I wanted to have children. Now, that's just my story, just how I personally felt about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So with my professional's help, I came down off of that, and all of my abilities went from like stifled and quiet-ish to yeah. Yeah, like I started hearing people, and accurately too. Like if you read my blog entitled Medium, I really detail the first time I heard spirit speak to me in a public place. And I was like, and told someone. You ever watch like Teresa Caputo, I'm not a fan, but
Yeah.
she's the Long Island medium, and
Yes.
she cold reads people. I hate that shit, but I didn't know how to control it.
Yeah.
And I stopped a woman and just kind of read for her father came and talked to me, and I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. But it was uncontrolled, but it was also validating for the first time.
Yeah, where it resonated and you were able to see, oh, this is now making sense. I want to backtrack to the 12-step program really quickly for people because, obviously some people can subscribe, some people don't subscribe to it, but the 12 steps the program itself is a very spiritual program. And I want to say to people, without having like a spiritual support system, like if you're diving into this with new eyes and understanding what this could mean for you if you're in addiction, stepping into something like that is highly supportive of spirituality. You don't need to like be religious. You don't need to believe in the Bible. You don't need to like do any of that stuff. But having that baseline and following those steps is such a spiritual process. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that's there to support so many people. And so I did just want to kind of share my 2 cents about that specifically.
I really appreciate that, because that's where I get the most resistance in recommending a 12-step program to people that are struggling with either active addiction or like dry addiction, dry drug, dry drunk, is the God issue. And listen, I grew up a devout Catholic, went to private Catholic school for 10 years. I was a Eucharistic minister, youth group leader in my town, CCD, the whole bit. But I was real angry at that God when I came into a 12-step program, and they were saying, it's in the 12 steps, like surrender to God, all these. And I'm like, ugh, but now I realize they use the word God for lack of a better term, because it's all encompassing. Right. And I'm mostly, as much as I still honor all those practices that I grew up in, I also now am mostly a practicing pagan. And there is nothing that I personally subscribe to that I feel any adversity at the 12-step program that I attend on a regular basis. And I sit next to people who are completely have different faith than me. And there's no controversy there. It specifically says it in the beginning of every single meeting I attend. They specifically say, we have no affiliation. We don't subscribe to any religion or organization. It's really just the concept of something greater than me. I'm not the all be all. And that's the end, because I have, as you know, Valerie, I have control stuff. So when I surrender to something greater than myself, I'm able to be a lot more free.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's how I think, because I know that, AA is just not for everybody, right? I mean, it just isn't. There is no one size fits all. AA has helped millions of people, and I understand that. And when I think of the 12-step program, that is exactly how I see it, is a surrendering to life and letting go of this idea that we as humans are in control, because all of my work is helping people get into alignment with their human self and their higher consciousness, right? That when I think about the work that I'm doing with people, and when I think of the 12 steps, that's the way I think about it. It doesn't matter what your religion is or how you think about God. It is understanding that we are in collaboration with Source, with our higher consciousness. And when we understand that and allow that to lead the way, or the heart, however people want to think about it, that's how I think about the 12 steps, is this idea of surrendering control. Because that drug that we are using to fill what you call a hole, and what I think of as this, is this believing that this third dimensional way of living in our human body is like all there is. That's that pain that we're talking about, right? And so we use that drug as a numbing agent rather than opening to this incredible beauty that surrounds us, and this unbelievable gift that we have that is called life, to wake up and to experience it all, to feel it, to taste it, to smell it, to breathe it, to feel love. That's how I think of AA and the 12-step program. And I think where people get tripped up and resist is because they think that they're being told what to do and how to live and what to believe. And that simply just is not, it's just not true. So I wanted to add that.
And I think that the 12 steps doesn't have to be just Alcoholics Anonymous. There are lots of 12-step programs. And for some people it's GA or NA or, OA, whatever it is, it's all the same thing. Addiction is addiction is addiction is addiction, right? It's filling that hole in your soul. It's trying to numb the things that you can't otherwise explain, understand, or make go away. And instead, now I have a substitution for that, and that's a connection with something greater than myself. And I will say, nobody ever said to me, you're an empath, you're a medium. I was 27 or 28 years old before somebody looked at me and said, oh my gosh, you're an empath. I was like, a what now? It was the first time, and I had been sober for years at that point. It was the first time someone said to me, oh yeah, you feel everything. And I was like, it literally in that moment took my breath away, because she was a stranger to me at the time, recognized that in me. She was a soul reader, and she just recognized it in me. And I felt vindicated and validated for the first time. I had almost been here for 30 years on this plane of existence before I really realized, oh my gosh, it is real. It's not insanity. And that's when things started to really open up, and I started working with a guide and a teacher. And now I teach people those things. And I cannot tell you how many people come in my office doors and come into my classroom that have active addiction issues, had stopped using drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, whatever, at fill in the blank, and didn't understand how it began in the first place. And they're these incredibly empathic, intuitive, psychic, gifted mediums and just didn't have a filter or an understanding or anyone to explain it to them. And that's a lot about what I teach, is kind of now finding a way to regulate that and make it a safer situation. It doesn't have to be so scary. I have God, or like the universe, whatever you want to call it, at my door protecting me. I talked about last time we met the spiritual bouncer, right? So like I have access to these tools and I teach other people now, but by and large, these people are all struggle with this addictive behavior.
It's so hard and beautiful that you are empowering people with that. I didn't never had anyone tell me what was going on for me. It was through my own devastation of life and having to start over so many times, and like things falling apart again, falling apart. And finally I was just like, something's got to give. And I like signed up for this spiritual class, and it was so divinely placed, obviously, like there's no coincidences. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gifted. I shut my gifts off at a very early age. When I was younger, I heard things. I was clairaudient. It was terrifying. And I got so blocked by that. And then it didn't take away from me feeling everything. I just didn't understand it. I wasn't able to put the puzzle pieces together where I was like, oh, that was that. And then now this is this. And now this is why I'm feeling this way. And so it is so beautiful that you empower people and give them that understanding. It is crucial. I've had so many friends and I've lost people along the way, and it is super heartbreaking to see like some of the end results with all of this. And I think this podcast, I want to share it with the world so people can see all the connections.
Yeah, I mean, I hope someone that's watching this is able to look at themselves and say, maybe there's something else going on here.
Yeah.
Because I know I felt like a terrible human being. When I first got sober, I was like, wow, you're really a
That's what I'm
POS.
talking about with the
right.
Yeah.
So for me, that happened when I was newly sober, and it was almost enough to send me back out. And I did ultimately end up relapsing. It was a short relapse, just a few days, but it leveled me. And I really felt the shame and guilt of how could you have let that happen? Like, what is wrong? Because I come from a good family. A loving, a lot of people's story is they were abandoned or they didn't have. So I have the most amazing mother. My stepfather is my father. And plus all the women in my family, I have this incredible support network. I had a leg up above a lot of people walking in the door, right, of getting sober, which has almost made me feel worse. I was like, oh my God, you are such a loser. How could you? You have all these great things. How could you?
Like your reason wasn't good enough.
The judgment. And I want to just stay here because the judgment, I talk a lot about this, and I actually write about judgment because that's what we do. It's not that we just judge ourselves harshly as human beings. It's also we judge the feelings that we have. Also, we can't even have a feeling about anything because we judge that as well. So even the judgment, as and as we open to this idea of spirituality and that we're more than just in human form, it's understanding how to love ourselves through our human experience, right? That's what this is about. This is what self-love means. It means loving ourselves in all of our humanness. And through these experiences, this is how we know our preference, right? Because we are, as humans, we live in contrast so that we understand the preference of joy, of leaning into that, of leaning into self-love. And I think those people, those of us who have had, I've never had those kind of severe addictions. I have certainly had addictions, though, to tobacco, to alcohol, those types of things. Um, and um, and and I you know, and for me, I was told at a very early age about my gifts, but I didn't believe it. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't even, I'm a therapist, right? I believed I was intuitive, and that was the end of it. The rest of it, I thought I was making up inside my own head. And so when people start to get sober and start dealing with this idea of shame, right, which can lead to the relapse. I don't know if your shame is actually what led you to your very brief relapse, Corrine, but I think it's loving ourselves even in the shame, not even getting rid of it, just loving ourselves in the experience that we're having so that we can move through it very quickly and not become the experience which can perpetuate the addictive behavior in the first place, right? So I wanted to just mention that because that was coming through very strongly for me right now.
Yeah. And I also want to kind of piggyback off that and acknowledge that that doesn't come easy for everybody, right? And having emotional intelligence and having the emotional regulation tools and having the understanding of how to work through big emotions is not a natural process. More often than not, even if you come from an amazing family and not amazing family, those tools are just not taught. And so and I wish it was. I wish that was part of raising children. They say raising kids doesn't come with a handbook. Well, someone needs to friggin' write one, because I think that, no, I mean, people say it all the time. And I'll tell you right now, if it did, it probably could, if we had a little handbook, like, this is important to teach your children outside of morals and not stealing and like being respectful of your elders. Like, can we teach people about emotions? Because emotions is the basis of our experience here. We're able to feel a full range of frequencies, and we're able to hold in low vibrational emotions, high vibrational emotions. But if you're not taught how to work through those lower experiences and those overwhelming big emotions, and you're holding it in, or you're, being explosive, however you're dealing with it, that is the most important aspect when it comes to having an addictive tendency, where you're just like, I'm totally out of control, and this brings me to a place of calm, or I feel so empty and hopeless in life that this makes me not have to think about that, or I don't even know what the hell I'm feeling, so I'm going to do this so I don't have to feel anything at all. It's very eye-opening to know where it stems from. And for people that don't know how to love themselves, there is so much out there outside of traditional therapy, like the work that you do or the work that I do around shadow work and the work that Susan does, where you can process those tools to come to a place of empowerment. How do you empower people around emotional intelligence and those tools as people are working through active addictions, let's say, when they're coming to you?
Ask that question again. Sorry.
How do you empower people around like emotional intelligence and emotional regulation tools when you're working with people that are coming to you with possible active addictions or something that they're working on around addiction? Like, how do you empower them in that with the tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think really recommending, like, I think validating is the biggest thing. I think being able to validate someone, like, yes, it's okay for you to feel this feeling. It's not wrong, because I know I felt wrong my whole life. Not just around my spiritual gifts. I just felt wrong and awkward and uncomfortable in my own skin from the rip, and I think so empowering and validating people or empowering people by validating them is probably the biggest thing. And we have a lot of tools to access. So of course, recommending like a 12-step program or therapy when it makes sense. But I think also like energy healing and, grounding and connecting with, I think feeling okay, connecting with yes, this is how I feel, and I don't have to judge it. I don't even have to fully understand it. I just have to have some acceptance.
Yeah.
And,
And you
and teaching people how to quiet their thoughts. That's the whole point of meditation. Meditation is not for everyone, but the point of it is to help people understand that our thoughts are just thoughts. They do not have to control, because with the thought comes an emotion, then comes an action. And this is, and I think that that is a huge piece of it. But I'm sorry, Val, I have something that I have to bring out, that I just am feeling that this is going to be very interesting. I cannot wait to hear what you both have to say about this. But the other thing, it's not just drugs. I've got a client right now that has a severe addiction to Mountain Dew, and nobody takes it seriously. Nobody. Now, this Mountain Dew addiction, it's the sugar and the caffeine in this drink, and it's a very real thing. There are no places to go for this, right? In fact, you call rehab centers and they basically laugh, oh, you're addicted to soda. It is ruining his life. He has to go drive around and drink his Mountain Dew. He tries to hide it. He deals with his Mountain Dew the way people deal with heroin addiction. There is not, it is ruining his life. And nobody is talking about these types of addiction. We know there are food addictions, right? We know, I mean, let's face it, a lot of alcohol addiction is also the sugar, which is why when people are in rehabilitation, there's candy everywhere, right? These are the things. And so what's interesting dealing with this client with the Mountain Dew addiction is how there isn't anywhere, he doesn't feel like there is anywhere for him to go to actually get help for this addiction. So I needed to say that, because I know there are people that are going to listen to this and be like, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel. Whatever that addiction is, whatever is taking over our life.
People, shopping, all of it.
Shopping
All of it
addictions,
comes in.
all of
I
those
know
things.
people actually can have an addiction to negative emotional tendencies, even like gossiping or chaos. Like, it's very real. There's a payoff in that gives the same type of dopamine release of gratification. It does come in so many different forms. And I think when I'm working with people that carry an ancestral line of addiction, actually giving people the tools, understanding their emotions, understanding their personal needs, understanding how to navigate pinpointing a void within themselves. People don't think to do that naturally. What do I need? What actually makes me happy? What do those big emotions mean? And when we look at an emotion wheel, anger is an umbrella for a massive amount of emotions, right? You say you're angry, it's not that simple. You might actually be feeling betrayed. You might actually be feeling, hopeless, although that doesn't fall under anger, but just using all these different emotions and saying, oh, this feeling is actually this feeling. And I'm having this feeling because it's a wound that I carry, or I'm having this feeling because there are needs that are not being met. So I feel a void within myself. And I think when I'm working with people that carry that ancestral line, getting people to understand the complexity of it all so they can step into a place of personal, like emotional independence is highly supportive in the realm of that particular ancestral line.
And I want to just say something else. I know I can feel it, Corrine. You want to say something too, but you just said something that I want to add to. You said hopelessness doesn't necessarily fall in the realm of anger. And where I would push back with that is that sometimes when we're the most hopeless, I just saw my God showing me people throwing like, come on, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. Why can't you help me? Right? What you had shared a story before we even started recording, Val, when you were at that place in your life and you got the $45,000, you're like, I need a car. Like, so sometimes in our most desperate moment is when we rage, right? When we just like absolutely rage, like, why is this happening to me rather than why is this happening for me, to really move that pain and be able to move out of it.
Yeah, they're
Corrine.
all intertwined.
Yes. Corinne, I know you wanted to say something. I could feel it.
Just reiterating what you both have said, which is that like addiction is addiction. It doesn't matter if it's to shopping, Mountain Dew, or heroin. It all hits that same pleasure reward center of the brain. And like they've done studies about this, like showing images. And so whether if my addiction is shopping, maybe they're going to show me, a Louis bag, you know what I mean? And the same things are going to fire if you show someone the works for a bag of heroin, right? That's addicted to heroin.
Or addicted to your dog like I am. Everything's about Rocky, everything.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I know one of the big things that you do also, Corinne, is, teaching people energetic boundaries and, understanding. I know we just went over a lot of the emotional stuff, but the things that are completely out of our control is, our personal frequency is our energetic boundary. If you are stuck in this experience where you might be in an active addiction, your frequency, your natural frequency is lowered and your energetic boundaries are wide open. So as much as it's numbing it, you're also taking a lot in. And so some people might not be able to maintain the frequency where they're not, feeling everything. They're not, they might get an attachment of some sort, but you really teach people in a lot of ways how to maintain an energetic boundary if their frequency can't handle it independently. Like I'm at a point in my work where I don't need to create a bubble around me. It's there because I'm at this frequency where I can hold that all the time, but not everybody is in that place. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you teach people those boundaries to support one more step of something that could make them fall apart at the seams in the realm of facing addiction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it sometimes starts with personal boundaries, like concrete, real, like, yeah, if it feels bad, I'm not going to do it. It's okay to block someone on social media because when I see their content, it violates my soul. It's okay to say no. And that's it, period. Having real boundaries. And I don't think people think about that as connected to spirituality, but if your real life day-to-day boundaries are, and they also don't have to be an electric fence. I say this all the time in class. Your boundaries you don't want them to be flimsy, right? And inconsistent, but they don't have to be an electric fence either. Right? No. You can put yourself in a safe place, but it starts with being consistent and unapologetic about your boundary. Right. So I think it's that self-love. When I'm in
good boundaries is self-love. That's
exactly what it is. That's
exactly. A lot of times when people are learning boundaries, they step into very black and white about everything because
it's dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, black and white is always an indicator of a wound, right? Mm-hmm. But eventually, as they practice, they normally get to that gray point, like, okay, mm-hmm. I might have to go like super hard here and it feels very rigid, but it's because they were so far on the opposite end of the spectrum that they can't even fathom how to do it any other way. The goal with understanding those challenges around active boundaries with people you're engaging in, because that does support your energy, is getting to that point where you find that gray, where you're like, okay, I can still have this boundary and it not be so rigid. It is a dance I talk about all the time with the people that I'm working with, especially around boundaries.
Well, it reminds me of with clients that I work with that are trying to create boundaries, especially for those of us who are empaths, right? You really want to help. We always want to help people. It draws us to the field. What does that mean? What does self-sacrifice mean? The whole thing. And so what I say to people and try to live this my own self, I'm not always great at it because I do tend to jump into that healing modality. But I want to just say this. I'll say whatever is best for you is always best for the collective. So I'm going to use a really simple example that we can all identify with. Somebody asks us to do something we don't want to do. I don't care what it is. Let's say your friend wants you to help them move. You don't want to help them move, but you do it out of obligation. And when you do it out of obligation, you might be resentful. You might be pissed off. So now you are bringing that vibration. This is what we're putting out into the world, right? It's out of alignment, right? Because it's not love. And so now you're doing something you don't want to do because you're doing it out of some obligation. And guess what? Take your energy and bring it somewhere else, because bringing that into the sphere of helping this person move is not going to be helpful. I used to say to therapists, you've got to ground yourself, or you're going to create more chaos with the family that you're working with. It is we are responsible for the energy we bring in anywhere. So if you say no and you honor that, and this is you do not want to go do this thing, it is, if it's best for you, it's best for the collective, because guess what? Now you're not going to be bringing in this vibration of resentment or all of these other things that we bring into a situation when it is something that we do not want to do.
That's how your frequency lowers, essentially.
That's how we
the
lower our
doors are
frequency.
open.
Yes.
All of those low vibrational emotions open the door and lower your frequency. You mentioned something, and I wanted to kind of touch on this. People that suffer from addiction that they know that they're healers. There are some people that are already actually have that sense of knowing. I know that I'm a healer. I'm dealing with this also, and I'm going to put this on pause, and then I'm going to step into healing the world, right? There's a level of focus on others, right? Instead of focus on self. And I think this is a very, very, very important topic to touch on for people that are stepping into releasing one addiction for another. And even if you're giving back to the world and you're stepping in as a healer, you do need to focus and work on the voids and the emotions that you're holding before you can support anybody else. You are not going to be able to step into this clearly without deep diving into some of that. And I think I have seen a lot of people that have kind of gotten over the hump of addiction, and they're hyper focused on helping everybody else. Like there is no self. It's I'm going to help this one. I'm going to help that one. I'm going to help. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever seen that too, Corrine? I see it commonly in my line of work.
I'll be completely transparent and let you know that I am in recovery from that as well. And I see it incredibly common, and I want to almost say consistently, with people who decide to put the drugs and the alcohol down, these intuitive, natural healers, empaths, etc., right? And then they want to save everyone. So they have no, and here's the thing, and Valerie, you and I have spoken about this over and over again, how that's the ego. I'm still trying to fill that place where I feel lack, and I only feel okay when I can help you. Right. And that's not what this is meant to be. Yes. So I teach my students, like, listen, if you're an empath, the idea is to observe. You can still sense what people need and support them without absorbing it.
But
right?
I have
what the true energetic boundary is.
Yeah, I have that post on my Instagram page. Observe, not absorb. I love that.
I love that.
For sure. I want to kind of, support those people that are kind of in that mentality to understand, yes, you have so much to offer. And yes, it's beautiful. Like they are now downloading information. The intuition's on blast. They have so much to share with the world, and they want everyone to see it. They want everyone to experience it. They want everyone to understand, where it's stemming from for them, without understanding where it's stemming from within. And I think that this could be also something that could really support people. It's beautiful to help and support everybody out there. You do have to start within first. You don't. Obviously, everybody has free will. You don't have to start, but you will end there eventually through the experiences. So just kind of knowing, how to kind of navigate this in a way that's in alignment for people is to really do some of that inner work where you can figure out what the emotions are that you're holding, what the voids are, how to create your energetic boundaries. These are the three things connected to addiction. And once you nail that, you will have the ability to support people in a really beautiful way where it's not coming from a place of trauma. It's not coming from a place of, I'm reading this energy through my own trauma, my own wounds, my own addiction. It can create a lot of hypervigilance. Whatever you're reading energetically, if it's triggering a wound in you, you're certainly not going to get a clear read because it's pulling up your own shit, right? And you're reading it through this little wall of your own trauma, and you're trying to get to the other side and read somebody else's, but it's too close for comfort. And so I think those three things can really support people in the realm of, where do I go with this information that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I really do teach that in my class, and lots of people who do the work that I do teach mediumship development, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful thing to develop. But my class is mediumship development and psychic protection. And the first 2 weeks is about learning how to observe without taking it on, about looking at healing yourself and keeping safe boundaries around yourself with living people, the dead people too, having all of that put into place before we dive into communicating with spirit, before we dive into receiving messages. Because I feel I remember how excited I was. I remember being like, oh my God, I just heard them. I felt that. And reading for people. My husband would be like, we were just dating at the time. He'd be like, please don't read the waitress at dinner. And I was like, well, I can't help it. I can't. And I couldn't. I didn't know how to have a filter on it.
I was the same
And
way.
it was affecting him, me, and ultimately the way I read for the person that was in front of me, So I think that it's putting the cart before the horse if you don't do that personal healing before you go out and go to try to heal other people.
We say the same thing about therapists too. You've got that. This is what countertransference and transference. This is where these terms come from, because if we are not doing our own work, then we can actually create more harm. But that being said, I've got to wind us down. I'm noticing time.
Oh yeah.
So Corrine, why don't you tell people, what do you have coming up? Where can people find you? We will have links to your website and whatnot in the show notes, but please share with our listeners.
So I am Beyond the Gate with Corrine Pelland. My office is in East Bridgewater, right on Route 18. So I'm easy to get to, plenty of parking here. And the next thing that I have happening is just on May 22nd, actually. I have it's 4 Wednesday nights at 7:30, May 22nd and 29th, and then June 5th and 12th. And it's a mediumship development and psychic protection class, which you already know begins.
Is this Zoom or in person?
This is in person. Okay. I'm not teaching on Zoom right now. I really love being in person, and I really think that there's something to be said for it, especially when doing this work. So I enjoy being in person. So it's going to be here in my office. I have 3 spots left in the class. It always sells out. I have never taught it, but it's been years now that I've been teaching it, that it doesn't, there's open spots. So if it's something that you're considering, please contact me. Payment plans are absolutely an option, because we all have this gift. Some of us don't have the choice to ignore it. And no matter how hard we try with addiction or many other options, and the only way is to step into your own power. And I want people to realize I'm not giving anyone any gifts. You are born, the gift is yours. I'm only teaching you how to integrate with it and access it in a way that feels good and is helpful to you and others.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you're making it accessible for everybody. I love that. I kind of lean into that same idea with people, making healing accessible and affordable. I love that so much. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really loved this topic. I hope it reaches the world, to everybody that needs to hear it. If anyone has any questions about this podcast recording today, please reach out to any one of us, Susan, myself, or Corrine. We're all very knowledgeable around this topic and can kind of guide you where you need to be in life. And that's it. All right.
Thanks, you guys. We love you. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.